So it occurred to myself and a few of us on the coordinating team when we were working on this agenda, that some of the items that would be coming before you as commissioners, you may not have any background in. That the conversation, that a couple of the motions coming from the coordinating team about a regional PDA, you may be a little lost about. And so we wanted to take an opportunity to have conversation about this so that as commissioners, you would feel as well informed as possible. So to that end, I asked Ernie Higginbotham, our assistant stated clerk, to sort of do an interview with a couple of us. Reverend Charlie Smith is the EP, or I should say interim presbytery pastor for Indian Nations Presbytery. And Reverend Sally Watson is the executive presbyter for Mission Presbytery. And we would like to answer some questions from Ernie in the hopes that it might answer some of your questions. Go ahead, Ernie.
Thank you, Valerie. Let's begin in the beginning. I expect most of you know about PDA, but Sally, would you tell us what is PDA, and then draw on your experience in Mission Presbytery and talk about the kinds of things that PDA has done and things we anticipate they may need to do in the future in our area.
Okay. PDA stands for Presbyterian Disaster Assistance. They are run out of our Presbyterian Mission Agency in Louisville. They respond nationally and internationally to all kinds of disasters. They are funded primarily by your offerings from One Great Hour of Sharing. So please give generously every spring. Within the Synod and also within Mission Presbytery, PDA has worked with us both in gray sky times and blue sky times. And that is their shorthand for gray sky is for when there is an active disaster, and blue sky is when there is not an active disaster, but we are trying to work in ways of mitigation during that time. I'm trying to think. One of the things about disaster work is that there are a bunch of different agencies, ecumenical within the church, but also civic organizations. Each of them has their own little piece of the pie that they do when there is a disaster. For example, the Texas Baptist men are always the first ones in with the chainsaws, and they come and they cut down the tree limbs, and then they're gone. Okay, somebody else HEB will come in with food trucks, and then they're gone. Presbyterian Disaster Assistance is usually about the last group in. We wait until at least a week or more after there has been a disaster when it's safe to go in and kind of go in and try to assess and see what's going on. And we are always the last ones out. I'm not sure, Richard or Valerie, but I think that we still have people on the ground in South Lou after Katrina. If not, they haven't been gone very long. And Ed Sackett has just left Mission Presbytery after being with us since Hurricane Harvey. So he was with us for 3 years. We are still doing some work there. So that's part of what they have done for us. We have been able to call when there has been flooding in the Rio Grande Valley. I know when I lived in New Mexico, we called them when there was a fire around Ruidoso. So they come in on all kind of things, but they also help us with mitigation work and preparation so that we can be in a better place when there is a disaster. Ernie, did you want me to talk about the future?
Yes, please.
Okay. The future is not looking bright as far as the number of disasters. If you listen to all the weather forecasters and prognosticators, we are not expecting things to get better. We're expecting things to get worse because of climate change. And there has been a disaster, I would say at least in every synod, I mean, every presbytery in our synod, at least over the last 3 to 4 years of one kind or another. The disasters are not only hurricanes, but floods, fires, and even some human-created disasters like the immigration situation. Those numbers are not going to go down. So PDA has their work cut out for them.
All right, thank you, Sally. Focusing on the future of the weather and the disasters, Charlie, maybe you can help us look to the future and think about how the Synod can further our mission to connect, equip, and empower by partnering with PDA and the presbyteries.
Ernie, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this. Indian Nations enthusiastically endorses the proposal. I think our hallmark and our strength as Presbyterians is our connectionalism, as demonstrated by this gathering here. Using the analogy of a body, Paul preached connectionalism to the church at Corinth and emphasized that what happens to one individual part affects the whole body of Christ. When disaster occurs in the Synod of the Son, wherever it may be, whatever state it may be in, whatever the cause, we all respond, even if not directly affected. Indian Nations Presbytery views this proposal as yet another way we can all equip ourselves through the Synod for the next disaster, which will inevitably come in a proactive rather than reactive way, allowing for the advantages of time in preparing advance for that time when we need to respond to all those in need. By building relationships and bridges of connection, we're all better empowered to be the hands of Christ.
Charlie, say a little bit more about these parallel tracks of being reactive and being proactive, of responding to disasters and helping us to prepare for dealing with disasters, and how this partnership with PDA and the Synod and the presbyteries to address that.
I think this proposal runs along two parallel tracks, both relational and preparatory. And I'm indebted to input given by two folks who are also on this call, Mitch Miller, Synod Commissioner, and our stated clerk, Tracy Evans. On the relationship side with presbyteries and churches, relationships would be built and strengthened across size and theological range, giving us all a better buy-in to a common effort. We would be building relationships with state agencies so that they could see us as partners, including knowledge of each state's apparatus for disasters and a relationship with that state's volunteers active in disaster group who works with the state emergency response and other response groups. Also, there would be relationships between and cooperation between PDA and each individual presbytery, so there would be better cooperation individually and collectively. Those relationships wouldn't only be with presbytery leaders, but also each member congregation and the pastors across the Synod. And finally, relationships between presbytery liaisons for better training, preparation, and response when the disasters do occur. On the preparation side, I think this proposal gives us the opportunity to have people prepared for potential disasters, to care for both selves and for neighbors, proactively and in advance. We would be prepared with teams on call and at the ready, allowing for both quicker and ongoing responses. PDA is good to respond, but sometimes they may be far away and then they go back to their home and there's not much relationship unless it's sought or when there's a need. It would allow us to line up and pre-position all our resources. It would allow us to designate locations for that pre-positioning and collection points and rallying points for more immediate responses. It would allow the training of presbytery liaisons and point persons who would be named to train and to teach others in a web sort of network. And finally, actually not finally, next to finally, it would allow us to designate and prepare places and churches that PDA could use for housing, both evacuation and work teams. And there would finally be an emphasis, I think, on mitigation. As a presbytery, we always need to prepare for a disaster, but it never seems to be at the top of our list. We keep shuffling our list and we find other things to keep us occupied. Having a person who works to help churches establish the protocol for disasters when not in disaster mode would allow us to move that up the list and keep it, at least to some degree, on everyone's radar all the time.
All right. Thank you, Charlie. Valerie, our focus of necessity is primarily on our congregations and our churches, but how would a Synod PDA representative enable us to also expand and serve and reach out to the communities in which we live?
Thanks, Ernie. I think, well, in case you haven't heard us say this yet, this conversation is about exploring the possibility of an additional staff member working for the Synod and with all of the presbyteries and for all of the presbyteries and PDA sort of all at one time. I think that oftentimes in times of disaster and in response to disasters, we see PDA and their work only in relationship to recovery of our churches, the sticks and bricks of churches and their immediate needs of our pastors and members. We sometimes fail to see that disaster response and even the preparation for disaster and our response is just as much about our communities and about how we reach out. So for some congregations, it's taken a pandemic to see that being church is not about whether or not our buildings remain standing. Being a church is about reaching out beyond ourselves into our communities. So this staff person would work with presbyteries to develop relationships with other volunteer or other agencies that also work in disaster and teach their congregations to do the same thing, to develop those relationships. I see this partnership in a way as assisting with church vitality in a different way. I believe that doing the work of planning, organizing, and building relationships ahead of disasters not only helps us to reach out now, but certainly puts us in a better position to be able to do so in the face of any disaster.
Well, hopefully this conversation has provided some background and context for the upcoming motions. Valerie, could you just summarize where we are in this process, what's kind of gone on, where we are now, and what we see coming next?
Sure. I've been in conversation with PDA about this particular subject for a couple of years now. The EP Forum, the EP Forum, which is all of the executives and lead staff persons of each presbytery, has discussed this a few times over the last few years. They've talked with national PDA staff, both with and without my presence. Currently, we're in the process of editing a potential covenant between all 13 partners. We're in the process of talking about financial implications and participation from each of the presbyteries. And I look forward to visiting with the presbytery leadership individually to envision together how we can be partners in moving this forward. Of course, the covenant will require approval of all of the partners, that is the Synod, and each of the 11 presbyteries individually. That will take some time. And exactly what that looks like is yet to be determined.
All right, that concludes my questions, and I assume that as we proceed, there will be opportunities for anyone else who has a question to raise that as we move forward. Thank you.
Moderator, this concludes this section of our report.